the suburbs of Belhaven, Greenwich, on the pleasant evening of October 30th, 1975, summer was in full swing. Martha was determined to convince her mother to allow her to partake in Mischief Night, the pre-Halloween tradition where harmless pranks were played around the neighborhood. After persistent persuasion, Dorothy, Martha's mother, finally relented and granted her permission. However, as the hours passed, Dorothy grew increasingly worried when she couldn't locate her daughter. She reached out to some friends, only to discover that no one had seen Martha. The search for her began, but it didn't take long to find her. Tragically, Martha was discovered lifeless under a pine tree, just 200 feet from her home, brutally murdered with a golf club. The events of that fateful night on October 30th left everyone questioning what had transpired and who could commit such a heinous act against an innocent young girl. The affluent community of Belhaven held many secrets behind its prestigious walls. Greenwich, one of Connecticut's oldest towns, boasted a rich history and culture. Situated just a 50-minute train ride away from New York City, this coastal town offered a delightful blend of New England charm and vibrant city life. The members of the Belhaven community were renowned for their wealth and influence, making it all the more shocking that such a privileged society could harbor dark secrets. Martha Elizabeth Moxley, a social butterfly, was known for her outgoing and fun-loving nature. Born on August 16, 1960, to Dorothy and John David Moxley, Martha was the youngest member of the family, alongside her older brother John. In 1974, Martha's father was transferred from his job in Piedmont, California, prompting the family to uproot and settle in a spacious mansion in Connecticut, thousands of miles away from their previous home in the affluent suburbs of Belhaven. While this transition may have been significant, quickly adapted to her new surroundings. In no time at all, she formed numerous friendships at school as her classmates were drawn to her vibrant personality and self-assurance. In just a span of 9 months, Martha managed to become the most popular girl at Western Junior High School. Her popularity extended to the boys as well, making her quite famous. Martha was a remarkable individual who seemed to have it all. She was known for her friendly nature, athletic abilities, and artistic talents. Everything seemed to come effortlessly to her. Her brother John described her as someone who was easy to get along with, positive, and someone you would enjoy being around. Despite her immense popularity, Martha remained grounded and family-oriented. She would often spend her time at home, either sketching or playing with her beloved cat, Tiger. However, like any other teenager, Martha also had a wild side. During the summer of 1975, she would spend most of her days at the Belhaven Club, engaging in activities like tennis and swimming. She would socialize with children from exclusive clubs, who were considered to be of a different class. Unlike her other friends, these children attended private academies and boarding schools and enjoyed a level of wealth that even surpassed Greenwich standards. Among these children, the Skakel family stood out, as they were cousins to the infamous Kennedys. Martha had a close connection with the Skakel boys, Thomas and Michael. The Skakels were neighbors to the Moxley family, and Thomas and Michael were nephews of Ethel Skakel and Robert F. Kennedy. The families were related, with Robert being the brother of the late President John F. Kennedy, Ethel Skakel's brother, Rushton, and his wife, and had 7 children, including Thomas and Michael, who were 17 and 15 years old, respectively, at the time of Martha's murder in 1975. However, the Skakel family was far from harmonious. Michael Skakel later attributed chronic illness, alcoholism, and a repressive Catholic upbringing as ongoing sources of turmoil within the household. In 1973, Ann Skakel passed away due to brain cancer, leaving her husband Rushton Skakel, who struggled with alcoholism, spiral further into a state of despair. With insufficient supervision and unlimited funds, Rushton would frequently leave their children home alone. As a result of his mother's death, Michael Skakel expressed that their household descended into an even more chaotic state. Interestingly, the Moxleys lived just about 150 yards away from the Skakels. Due to the lack of parental supervision, the Skakel household became a popular gathering spot for teenagers. Meanwhile, Martha was enjoying her summer days within the secure confines of the gated community in Belhaven. Her teenage years were filled with occasional rebellious acts such as sneaking out, smoking, and indulging in a few beers. In her diary, Martha documented several incidents that occurred during these holidays, many of which revolved around the Skakel brothers. Martha was particularly concerned about the advances she received from Thomas. On September 12, 1975, she wrote, "Dear Diary, me, Jackie, Michael, Thomas, Hope, Maureen, and Andrea were driving in Tom's car. I was practically sitting on Thomas's lap because I was only steering. He kept placing his hands on my knee. Then I took over driving again and Tom put his arm around me. He continued to engage in such behavior. Additionally, on September 19, 1975, Martha made a note about Michael stating, "Michael was so completely out of it that he acted like a real jerk with his words and actions. He kept insisting that I was leading Tom on, even though I only see him as a friend. I told him, well, what about you and Jackie? You keep saying you don't like her, yet you're all over her." He fails to understand that he can be kind to her without being overly affectionate. It was evident that Martha had conflicting emotions about the Skakel brothers and often questioned whether she should continue spending time at their place. The uncertainty regarding her own safety and comfort weighed heavily on her mind. However, no one could have anticipated the events that would unfold next. On the 30th of October in 1975, the mischief hour commenced. Martha made every effort to persuade her mother to allow her to go out with her friends. Martha's father, John, was away on a business trip, leaving her with the opportunity to employ various tactics to gain her mother's approval. After persistent pleading, Dorothy finally succumbed to her daughter's request and granted her permission to go out for the night. Bellhaven, the community they resided in, was known for its high level of security. Every individual entering or leaving the area was thoroughly inspected, making it highly improbable for any crimes to occur within such a safe locality. Martha ventured out with her friends Jackie, Jeffrey, and Helen, heading towards the Skakels' residence where they were scheduled to meet with their Kennedy cousins. As the night progressed, midnight approached. Dorothy was accustomed to her daughter occasionally missing her curfew, so her concern did not arise until 2:00 a.m. Initially, she assumed that Martha might have stayed over at her friend's house. In an attempt to locate her, Dorothy contacted Martha's best friend Sheila, only to discover that she had not seen Martha since 9:30 p.m., around the same time when all the children had returned home. By 3:30 a.m., Dorothy was consumed with worry and decided to reach out to their neighbor, Thomas Skakel, who provided the same response as Sheila. At 3:35 a.m., Dorothy reluctantly gave up and contacted the police for assistance. The local Greenwich officers promptly arrived at the Moxley residence. After conducting a thorough search of the neighborhood alongside Dorothy, they found no signs of anything amiss. The officers reassured Dorothy and advised her to wait until morning. However, before departing, they disseminated Martha's information to nearby stations, urging them to remain vigilant for any sightings of her. Exhausted, Dorothy eventually fell asleep by the window, anxiously awaiting her daughter's return. The following morning, on October 31st, 1975, Dorothy hurriedly entered Martha's room, only to discover that her bed was empty. The authorities were once again summoned, and an unsettling sense of unease began to envelop her. She had a gut feeling that something was amiss. Dorothy refused to simply wait idly, so she made the decision to venture around the neighborhood accompanied by her son, John. The first place they decided to search was the Skakel residence. Despite living next door for 15 months, Dorothy had never set foot inside her neighbor's home. As she approached, their aggressive dog greeted her, leaving her quite shaken. Gathering her courage, she knocked on the door, and Michael, the younger Skakel brother, promptly answered. Dorothy inquired about Martha's whereabouts, but Michael informed her that Martha was not present and appeared to be in poor health. In fact, Dorothy suspected he might be hungover. Undeterred, Dorothy was determined to find some clue. She requested permission to inspect the camper parked outside, as she speculated that Martha might have fallen asleep there. However, her hopes were dashed when she discovered the camper to be empty. By this time, news of Martha's disappearance had spread throughout the community, prompting friends, neighbors, and the police to gather at Bellhaven to search the premises. Shortly after noon, Martha's friend Sheila arrived at the Moxley household, trembling with fear, struggling to find the words to describe what she had just witnessed. Through tear-filled eyes, Sheila implored Martha's mother to call 911 for assistance. She revealed that something terrible had occurred, and Martha was unresponsive. Someone had attacked her, and immediate help was needed. Dorothy's companion, Jean, urged her to remain where she was while he investigated the situation. Upon reaching the scene, Jean made a horrifying discovery. Lying face down beneath the towering pine tree at the edge of the Motley property, 200 feet away from her house, was the missing teenager. The back of her head had been brutally bludgeoned and a broken golf club protruded from the back of her neck. Martha's attire was stained with blood, and her jeans and undergarments were pulled down to her ankles. Adjacent to the young girl lay a shattered 6-iron golf club, which had been repeatedly used to strike her head. The force of the blows was so intense that the club broke into 3 separate pieces, scattered across the ground near her lifeless body, except for the grip of the handle. The law enforcement officials were taken aback by the gruesome discovery. In the past 3 decades, Greenwich had not encountered a violent crime of this magnitude, let alone something as atrocious as this. The local police were ill-equipped to handle the severity of the situation at hand. Consequently, a team from the Connecticut County Station was assigned to conduct a thorough investigation. The forensic experts diligently collected as much evidence as possible from the crime scene, while Martha's body was sent for autopsy. The examination revealed no signs of sexual assault, with the primary cause of death being attributed to the blunt force trauma to her head. It was later revealed that Martha Moxley had remained a virgin until her untimely demise. As the investigation progressed, the local police officers in Greenwich began compiling alibis from all known witnesses in order to establish an accurate timeline of events surrounding the homicide. The Skakel brothers were the first individuals on their list. Both boys were interrogated on the same day, during which they provided their respective alibis for the time of the murder. When questioned, Thomas Skakel informed the detectives that he had last seen Martha around 9:30 p.m. outside his residence. He claimed to have immediately gone inside after bidding her farewell, where he joined the family's new live-in tutor, Kenneth Littleton, to watch the movie The French Connection. Thomas later returned to his room to work on a school report about Abraham Lincoln, although his teachers denied assigning such a task. Eventually, Thomas underwent 2 polygraph tests. The first test yielded inconclusive results, but he successfully passed the second one. Michael Skakel informed detectives that he left his residence at approximately 9:15 p.m. and drove to his cousin Jimmy's house, returning around 11 o'clock p.m. The police harbored some doubts regarding Michael's account, but lacked concrete evidence to label him as a suspect in the case. 24-year-old Kenneth Littleton was also under investigation in the autumn of 1976. He informed the authorities that he heard noises outside the house between 9:30 and 10 o'clock p.m. Littleton mentioned that before going outside, he checked on all 7 Skakel children, noting that Michael, his older brother Thomas, and 2 other Skakel boys were not present at home during that time. Detective Salmon's reports indicated that Littleton heard rustling leaves and noises from the bushes on the property, although he did not witness anything at that moment. Littleton stated that he only saw Thomas at 10:25 p.m. when he joined him in front of the TV. The other Skakel boys returned home within half an hour. Littleton claimed to be unaware of Martha Moxley's identity, as it was his first night at the Skakels' residence. Despite failing multiple lie detector tests, Littleton was never formally charged in connection to the case. During the ongoing investigation, the police discovered 2 significant pieces of evidence. Martha Moxley had been beaten and stabbed with a Tony P. golf club engraved with the initials of the Skakel family member. Upon inspection, the same set of golf clubs was found at the Skakel household, with 1 club missing. Rusht and Skakel, their father, who had returned from a hunting trip upon learning of Martha's murder, initially cooperated with the authorities, but later ceased communication with them. On January 22, 1976, the Skakel family, following their attorney's advice, declined to respond to further inquiries and terminated their cooperation with the investigators. Martha's friends provided alibis that raised numerous questions. On the night of October 30, 1975, Martha Moxley joined her friends for Mischief Night, a neighborhood tradition involving pranks like ringing bells and toilet papering houses. According to her friends, Martha was seen flirting with Thomas, the oldest Skakel brother, and moments later, they found her kissing him. One of her friends mentioned seeing Martha and Thomas near the pool in Skakel's backyard, behind the fence around 9:30 p.m. Over the next few months, the detective conducted more than 200 scheduled interviews. All interviewees underwent multiple polygraph exams as part of the investigation process. Donald Brown, the state's attorney for Fairfield County at the time of Martha's murder, stated that while individuals are not obligated to cooperate with the police, it is unusual for someone possessing information about a violent crime to withhold it from investigators. Initially, the case went cold for nearly 2 decades due to a lack of information. However, in 1991, a rumor linking another Kennedy family member, William Smith Kennedy, to the murder led to the reopening of Martha Mosley's case. Although William's connection to the case was eventually dismissed, this development sparked new leads and reignited the investigation. In the same year, renowned forensic pathologist Dr. Henry Lee was brought in by the police. Dr. Lee utilized advanced technology that was not available in 1975. Dr. Lee examined various items, including clothes found in the Skakel garbage shortly after the murder. He discovered hairs in the fibers, some of which were microscopically similar to the victim's hair, while others were merely similar. Dr. Lee concluded that the hair belonged to a Caucasian male. However, the investigators faced a challenge as they did not possess any hair samples from the potential suspects, making it impossible to establish a match. Nevertheless, Dr. Lee managed to provide a potential motive for Martha's murder by studying the crime scene photographs. He noted that the blood smear on her body indicated an attempt to use force, suggesting a sexually motivated homicide. This revelation led to Michael quickly becoming the primary suspect in the case. Rushton Skakel, in an attempt to clear his family's name, allegedly hired a private investigator. He hoped that this would shift suspicion onto other suspects, particularly former suspect Kenneth Littleton. Unfortunately for him, this plan backfired. Private investigators Jim Murphy, a former FBI agent, and his assistant Willis Billy Krebs, a former NLNPD lieutenant, became involved in the Martha Moxley case. During their interviews with Tom and Michael Skakel regarding their activities on the night of the murder, it was revealed that both boys had lied to the police. Thomas Skakel admitted that he had last seen Martha outside his house closer to 10 o'clock p.m., not 9:30 p.m. Additionally, Thomas and Martha engaged in inappropriate activity outside his home before he went back inside. According to Krebs, Thomas became emotional and started crying while confessing this, but his lawyer interrupted before he could say more. Meanwhile, Michael Skakel informed the investigator that he did not go to bed upon returning home from his cousin's house around 11 o'clock p.m. Instead, he had climbed a tree outside Martha Moxley's bedroom window and engaged in inappropriate activity. Author and journalist Dominic Dunn obtained the investigator's report and passed him on to State Inspector Frank Garr, who had previously worked as a detective on the case. Despite sharing his suspicions about Michael Skakel earlier, lack of information led to dismissal. This report provided new momentum to this theory. Leonard Levitt, an investigative reporter, covered the Moxley case in 1982 and also had a similar theory about Michael. He pointed out the absence of defense wounds, suggesting that the victim knew of her attacker. Levitt believed that the repeated blows with the golf club indicated a crime of passion, implying a personal connection between the two. Levitt waited 20 years to report on Martha Moxley. The report revealed that both Thomas and Michael Skakel had made shocking admissions to the detectives. They confessed to lying to the police about their whereabouts on the night of the murder. Thomas claimed to have spent time with Martha after 9:30, engaging in a sexual act, before leaving her around 10 o'clock. Levitt emphasized the inconsistencies in Thomas's story. In 1998, a one-man grand jury and an investigator were tasked with reviewing Martha Moxley's case. After examining the evidence, Judge George N. Thim concluded that there were sufficient grounds to charge Michael Skakel with her murder. Michael faced trial for Martha's murder in his late 30s, finally receiving justice after nearly 2 decades. He was convicted based on circumstantial evidence presented during the 3-week trial. Investigators have found a piece of the golf club, a 6-iron from a set that had belonged to Michael's mother. However, prosecutors lacked direct physical evidence linking Michael to the murder case. He insisted he was far away from the crime scene at his cousin's house, watching Monty Python's Flying Circus. Nevertheless, jurors later stated they were swayed by his incriminating statements and erratic behavior. Several former classmates of Skanko testified during the trial. While at Elon School, a facility for troubled youths, Michael reportedly confessed to them about Martha's murder. One former schoolmate, Gregory Coleman, testified in a pre-trial hearing in June 2000 that Skakel had told him, "I'm going to get away with murder. I am a Kennedy." Coleman also mentioned that Michael had claimed he tried to make advances towards a girl who did not reciprocate, leading him to commit the crime. However, Coleman passed away in August 2001 due to a heroin overdose and did not testify during Michael's murder trial in 2002. Michael had a troubled past, with rumors circulating about his time at Elon School. Despite the school owner's denial of any confession, numerous witnesses supported the claim. 2 former classmates from Elon School, including John D. Higgins, came forward as witnesses during the trial. Higgins described Michael's confession as tearful, dazed, and fragmented, with Michael only recalling bits and pieces of the crime. Gregory Coleman, the other witness, stated that Michael confidently declared he would escape punishment for Martha's murder due to his family name. Following Michael Skakel's imprisonment in August 2002, his cousin, Robert Kennedy Jr., became a staunch advocate for him. Kennedy firmly believed that his cousin was innocent and being falsely implicated for political reasons. In his interview with CBS 48 Hours, Kennedy expressed his certainty, saying, "I know Michael Skakel and I know he didn't commit this crime." In 1997, Michael Skakel collaborated with ghostwriter Richard Hoffman to write his autobiography titled Dead Man Talking. A Kennedy cousin comes clean during the trial. A particular recording played proved to be highly incriminating. Michael admitted that on the night of Martha's murder, he was intoxicated, had consumed marijuana and experienced inappropriate urges. When Dorothy Moxley arrived at his door the next morning, Skakel panicked. He confessed on the recording, "I was still under the influence from the previous night, a bit intoxicated and worried if he had been seen." Michael claimed he was concerned about being caught by anyone from the Moxley household. Prosecutors argued that Michael's reference to engaging in inappropriate acts was actually him admitting to beating Martha with a golf club. Michael's defense countered by highlighting the lack of physical evidence against him in presenting an alibi for the time of Martha's murder. Nevertheless, the prosecution portrayed Michael as a jealous teenager during the trial. They argued that his rejection by Martha, combined with his drug and alcohol use and access to the murder weapon, led him to act on his violent thoughts. On June 7, 2002, the jury delivered a guilty verdict, resulting in Skakel's sentencing to 20 years to life in prison. The jury and state superior court revealed their decision just after 10:30 a.m. following the commencement of its fourth day of deliberations. Russian Skakel seemed almost shocked as the foreman declared the verdict in the crowded silent courtroom. The public celebrated the justice served. This case was one of the most intricate and sorrowful in the Northeast, enveloped in a whirlwind of affluence and fame. The 27 years of torment finally came to an end for the Moxley family. Outside the courthouse, Mrs. Moxley confronted a large crowd of reporters and television crews. Through tears, she mentioned that she had prayed before entering the court. "My prayer began with, 'Dear Lord, once again today, just like I have been doing for 27 years. I prayed that I could attain justice for Martha,' she expressed. This entire ordeal was about Martha," she continued. "Today belongs to Martha. This is truly Martha's day." While Michael was incarcerated, his legal team and supporters fought for the annulment of his conviction. 4 appeals were submitted, all of which were rejected. Then, on October 23, 2013, Michael was granted a new trial due to the inadequate representation provided by his defense attorney, Mickey Sherman. Consequently, Skakel was released on $1.2 million bail on November 21, 2013. Prosecutors strived to reinstate Skakel's conviction. They eventually succeeded in December 2016, when the Connecticut Supreme Court ruled with a 4-3 decision, affirming the validity of his representation. However, the case did not conclude there. In May 2018, the court overturned its ruling with another 4-3 decision, determining that Michael's attorney, Mickey Sherman, failed to present evidence of Michael's alibi during the initial trial. Prosecutors still retain the option to retry Michael, although they will likely encounter challenges due to deceased witnesses and other issues. Michael's legal team, in a release statement, commended the court's decision, stating that it was the right course of action. The lawyers have also stated that Michael, who maintains his innocence, has been wrongly incarcerated. However, the Moxleys remain steadfast in their belief of Michael's guilt. "I have no doubt in my mind that he is responsible," Dorothy asserted. John Moxley, her 59-year-old son, expressed that the jury's decision in the 2002 trial, reached after considering the evidence against Michael Skakel, continues to provide him with reassurance. "We have a sense of comfort knowing what transpired," he stated. Currently 55 years old, Michael Skakel resides with his aunt in Westchester County, New York. He spends his days caring for his 15-year-old son, George, and striving to move forward from the trauma of his past conviction and imprisonment. He is legally obligated to seek permission from the court to travel outside of Connecticut or New York. "I wish to leave this nightmare behind so that I can start building a life with George without this constant burden," he expressed in an email. "I lost 11.5 years of my life. I missed out on George's entire childhood. I know I can never reclaim those years, but I consider myself fortunate to be able to spend time with George now." The death of Martha Moxley haunted the Greenwich community, her family, and friends for over 40 agonizing years. While many still believe that the verdict against Michael was fabricated, ultimately, a mother lost her daughter, and the state of Connecticut failed to deliver proper justice for Martha's death. Numerous individuals believe that Michael evaded punishment due to his connections and wealth. Martha's father, John David Moxley, fought for his daughter's justice until his death in 1988. Even to this day, the Kennedy family continues to be associated with the Martha Moxley case. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who authored the book, framed why Michael Skakel spent over a decade in prison for a murder he didn't commit in 2016, left Dorothy Moxley, Martha's 84-year-old mother, speechless with his publication. She mentioned that truth had never appeared so distorted and manipulated in her entire life. Despite this, she remained convinced that Michael was responsible for her child's death. Kennedy's book dedicated a whole chapter to tarnishing John's character, Martha's father. He cast doubt on his whereabouts on the night of the murder and made several accusations against the Moxley family. As of December 2019, Michael Shacko is still a free man. The memory of Martha Moxley is forever engraved in the hearts of Greenwich residents. A young, beautiful girl was robbed of her innocence before she could fully blossom into adulthood. This is not the first tragedy that has been swept under the rug by the Kennedy family. The legal battle between Michael and the Moxley family was a nationwide conflict, and while there are still many unanswered questions surrounding this case, we offer our sincerest condolences to the family of the victim. Kate Waring was born in Charleston, South Carolina. She had two siblings and loving parents who tried to give their children the best of everything. From a young age, Kate showed a deep affection for animals and began volunteering at various shelters during her teenage years. She was also a dancer, had many friends, and was a very positive person. Everyone thought she had grown up in a very good environment, and to some extent this was true, but one day everything changed. Just before going to college, Kate confided in her parents that someone close to their family had abused her when she was younger. She apparently did not reveal the identity of the individual, as this information is not found anywhere. The revelation was a real shock to Kate's parents. They had no idea what their daughter had been going through for years. After sharing this terrible secret, her mother and father did everything they could to help her, but the consequences of such trauma only seemed to worsen over time. Initially, Kate struggled with alcohol and later with illegal substances. At one point, her parents suggested she undergo therapy, which she accepted. They also encouraged her to move back home and live with her family, which supposedly would also help her cope with her problems. By then, Kate was an adult and lived separately, but despite everything, she agreed to return home. At first, it seemed that therapy was truly having a positive effect, but Kate continued to be unable to shake off the heavy burden of the past and start living life to the fullest. The psychiatrist she visited diagnosed her with depression, but at one point, everything changed. Her father, who was always concerned and striving to help her, suggested taking a trip to any part of the world she chose. Kate was excited by the idea and soon decided she wanted to travel beyond the Arctic Circle. Her dream was to see polar bears, and despite her sad experience, she still felt a great love for animals. They began to look for suitable tours and soon bought tickets for a trip to the Arctic Circle by boat. Kate was eager to embark on this exciting journey. At that point, her parents saw her depressive state being replaced by a cheerful and positive attitude. When they finally took the trip, Kate was delighted. She and her parents had a great time, and she experienced many positive emotions on the boat that took them to the Arctic Circle, where Kate met another Russian tourist. They kept in touch throughout the trip and continued writing to each other afterward. Kate grew fond of him, and sometime after returning home, she decided to go to Russia. There they reunited, and she even considered staying longer in the country, but was prevented from doing so by visa issues, forcing Kate to return home. Despite this, it seemed that Kate had finally managed to overcome her depression. She planned to resolve her visa issues back home and even started writing a book for her children. It seemed her life was finally getting better. However, on Saturday, June 12, 2009, everything changed. That day, Kate was alone at home while her family was away on a business trip. Kate would always call her father to say everything was fine, but this time she didn't. Concerned, her father tried to call her, but there was no answer. After some time, he asked someone to check on their daughter at home. Given her past problems with alcohol and illegal substances, the parents were worried. Upon arriving home, this person did not find Kate, but strangely, the light in her room was on. It seemed as though Kate had just stepped out and would return soon, but Kate did not appear. It was also discovered that Kate had left important medication at home, which she needed to take regularly. Despite their anxiety, her parents decided not to panic and to wait for her return. Considering that Kate was 28 years old at the time and capable of living her own life, her father decided to wait until Monday, after which he planned to call the police. On Monday morning, the father received a call from the bank. An employee informed him that a man had attempted to cash a check for over $4,000 signed by Kate Waring. They couldn't reach Kate herself, and her father was listed as a co-signer on her account. The situation seemed extremely odd. The father knew for certain that his daughter only had a few $100s in her account. That was why the bank security decided to contact him. However, Kate's signature on the check appeared authentic. They also provided the name of the man who had brought in the check, Ethan Mack. The father did not recognize him, but since the bank authenticated Kate's signature, he assumed the man was an acquaintance of his daughter. Nevertheless, he decided to contact the police as Kate was still unreachable. Detectives began to investigate the woman's disappearance and first questioned Ethan Mack. He claimed to have known Kate for years and that she had written the check to settle old debts. According to Ethan, he frequently gave Kate money for clothing, jewelry, and other purchases. Conversations with Kate's friends revealed that she had been friends with Ethan for an extended period. They indicated that there had never been a romantic relationship between the two, but they were always close. Ethan claimed that he and Kate met on Friday night and went out for dinner at a restaurant. Afterwards, he drove her home and left for his own affairs. He even showed detectives correspondence with Kate, which confirmed his account of their dinner. Ethan allowed the detectives to search his house, where he lived with his mother, as well as his car. Nothing suspicious was found during the search, but the police still found the situation regarding a check to be odd and were not quick to dismiss him as a suspect. Eventually, Ethan called the police station, forcefully requesting to be left alone. The police tried to reconstruct the timeline of the Friday night when Kate was last seen. She had seen her therapist in the afternoon, then went to the gym. Afterwards, she entered a store and bought a bottle of wine. Security cameras captured her talking to someone on the phone at that time. According to the investigation, it is possible that she was speaking with Ethan, who later picked her up, and they went to a restaurant. Kate's parents recalled another disturbing fact on the day she disappeared. Kate had told them she was having some problems but declined to specify the nature of these issues. Her parents did not recall this conversation until a few days later. Unfortunately, this information did not aid the search. As weeks passed, Kate remained unlocated. Her parents felt the police were not doing enough, considering Kate's troubled past. In August, however, the case was revitalized when it was taken up by a group of former police officers led by a lawyer named Andy Savage. This group had been privately investigating unresolved cases, and Kate Waring's case caught their interest. The team consisted of 5 individuals, each with extensive police experience. One of them, former Detective James Randolph, first examined Kate's bedroom and noted 2 suspicious elements. Firstly, he was struck by a packet of medication that Kate regularly took. Her parents confirmed she would never intentionally stop taking her medication, so the fact that the packet was left at home was highly concerning. Secondly, he found Chinese currency on Kate's bed, which was peculiar because her parents had no idea where she had obtained it or why she needed it. Another team member, Bobby Mitter, who specialized in gathering online information about individuals and tracking them, was then involved. His skills proved invaluable. He quickly found that on the night of her disappearance, around 10 p.m., Kate had called her friend James, who did not answer the phone. She then left him a very troubling voicemail claiming someone had stolen her credit cards and revealed that her phone was last active at 1:53 a.m. when for some reason, she called her own voicemail number. Lewis discovered that the call was made from the area of James Island, which was a few kilometers from Kate's house. Another team member, former homicide detective Eugene Fraser, learned something intriguing. He spoke with several acquaintances living in James Island and found it odd that Ethan Mack, who had voluntarily let the police inspect his and his mother's home, did not actually live there. Instead, he rented an apartment in a nearby building. Eugene was fortunate to uncover these details, since one of his acquaintances happened to be the landlord of the apartment Ethan had rented. Digging deeper, the team of detectives realized the police had not conducted a proper investigation into Ethan. They had only performed a superficial check of his mother's house. The team decided to investigate on their own and found that Ethan had a girlfriend named Heather Camp. When they asked Kate's parents if they knew the woman, her mother recalled a strange story. Kate had met Heather about a month before she disappeared on a train from Washington, D.C., where Kate had been having issues with her visa for Russia. After meeting her on the train, Heather told Kate that she had been robbed of her wallet and now had nothing to live on. Kate agreed to help and lent her a significant amount of money. Heather claimed she had landed a job as a pediatric surgeon in South Carolina and was supposed to start in the coming days. Later, Heather announced that her daughter had died in a car crash in New Jersey, and her behavior appeared completely irrational. She did not go there, and her demeanor suggested that her daughter's death did not affect her greatly. The detective team discovered another curious fact. Heather was facing a fraud case in Indiana. The charge was that she had been posing as a licensed doctor by falsifying the necessary documents. The team thus gathered an impressive set of data that forced them to look at the case from a different angle. They passed all this information to the police, but the police were completely reluctant to continue the investigation. The team realized that the only way to get the police to take action was to present incontrovertible evidence that implicated Heather in Kate's disappearance. To achieve this, the team took extreme measures. First, they asked the person who rented the apartment to Ethan Mack to install a hidden camera in front of his apartment door. Moreover, they installed a hidden GPS tracker in Ethan's car. This allowed the team to monitor his movements and see what he was doing. It didn't take long to bear fruit. After examining Ethan's travel patterns, the detectives discovered that he had stopped at numerous pawn shops around the city. They followed his trail and found out that at each of these pawn shops, the man was selling various pieces of jewelry in small batches. Unfortunately, they couldn't ascertain if the jewelry belonged to Kate, but the detectives felt they were getting closer to a clue. After some time, they encountered a serious problem. The landlord of the apartment where Ethan and Heather were staying informed them that he was going to evict them for non-payment. The teen realized that if he did, they would lose the chance to watch their behavior and movements. So they made an effort to persuade the landlord not to do it. Along with this, the detectives urgently devised a new plan. They asked the landlord to give Ethan and Heather an extra period to pay the rent, but with one condition. Both had to sign an agreement committing to clear this debt in any case. This strategy worked. As soon as the landlord gave the team this contract, they sent it immediately to the laboratory. The objective was simple: to compare the handwriting of Ethan and Heather with Kate's signature on the check for $4,000, and here they had a pleasant breakthrough. The handwriting expert confirmed with absolute certainty that the signature on the check was from the same person who had signed Heather's name on the contract. This meant that it was Heather who had forged Kate's signature. But the team was well aware that the sluggish police would still not want to listen to them. They had to find something else and devised a new plan. They convinced the landlord to go along with it, and he told Ethan that the apartment needed to be treated for insects. The team leader put on an exterminator's suit and went to the apartment with the landlord. Before, the detectives waited until Ethan had left the apartment. Realizing that his car had moved away from the house, the investigator and the landlord entered. They faced an unpleasant surprise. Ethan was at home. It turned out Heather was driving his car, but it was too late to cancel the whole operation. So the investigator had to change the plan. They kept insisting on the necessity of fumigating and asked Ethan to wait outside the apartment while the dangerous chemicals were sprayed. Ethan, suspecting nothing, agreed and left. At the same time, the investigator began to carefully search the apartment for any evidence that could link Ethan to Kate's disappearance. He noticed Ethan's backpack and examined its contents. There awaited their first clue: Chinese money. As we recall, the same notes were on Kate's bed. But that's where their luck ran out. He couldn't find any other potential clues. He and the landlord pretended to complete the treatment and left. The team needed a new plan again. Upon reviewing the footage from the camera in front of Ethan's apartment, they realized that there was a man who entered very often. It turned out to be a neighbor of the couple named Terry Williams. The detective speculated that he might know something about Ethan and Heather's involvement in Kate's disappearance. So the team took a risky step. They decided to offer Williams a significant sum of money if he told the police what his friends had done to Kate. They took the bag of money and went to Williams's apartment with this offer. But here the detectives were met with a quite unexpected twist. At the time when Williams was approached and informed of the situation, Heather was at her own home and overheard everything. Apparently, there was a discussion involving Ethan and Williams. When the detective started speaking with her lover, Heather panicked. She called Ethan and hysterically explained what had happened. The investigation team did not expect this and spent the following days trying to figure out what to do next. Then, another surprise occurred. Williams called them and invited them to his house to talk. The detectives arrived at his apartment and Williams spoke up. He claimed that Ethan and Heather had not directly told him anything, but he suspected that the couple had done something wrong to Kate. He then took an iPod from the shelf and revealed that Heather had given it to him shortly after Kate's disappearance, and Williams had assumed that the player belonged to Kate. The team examined the iPod and, thanks to its serial number, was able to confirm that it belonged to Kate. This set of clues was sufficient for them to return to the police department. This time, the local police could no longer dismiss the case. After reviewing all the evidence the team had uncovered, they finally arrested Ethan and Heather. During the initial interrogation, Heather agreed to cooperate with the investigation in exchange for a reduced sentence. She claimed that Kate's body was on Guatemala Island, about 20 miles from her house. The police sent a search team and scoured the area all day, but Kate's body was not there. It soon became clear that Heather had misled them. Then Andy Savage decided to employ another tactic. He realized that Heather was probably directly involved in Kate's murder, so he met with her and promised to help. Andy offered her a deal. He would do what was necessary to get her off the forgery charges, and in return, she would have to reveal the exact location of Kate's body. Heather, believing it was her only chance, agreed. She indicated that Kate's body was still on the outskirts of Guatemala Island and gave a detailed description of the location. The team of detectives decided to go there without the police and faced disappointment. They did not find Kate, but they returned the next day and finally made a discovery. They found the remains of the young woman. The forensic doctors could not determine the cause of death, but the culprit soon began to confess. In August 2009, Heather signed a confession for murder, obstruction of justice, and bank check forgery. The police discovered that she had been committing fraud for years and had selected Kate as her next victim during a trip from Washington. Later, she met Ethan and started a relationship with him. As for Ethan, he was not quick to plead guilty and his trial began in October 2010. Based on Heather's testimony, the prosecution reconstructed the events of the disappearance. According to her story, on the day Kate disappeared, she found out that Heather had deceived her and also stolen her credit cards. Kate threatened to tell her father, who would likely involve the police. Heather told Ethan, who took her side despite his long friendship with Kate. According to the investigation, Kate was not just having dinner with Ethan that night. Heather was also present. It seems that the pair was trying to negotiate with Kate to prevent her from revealing the deception. At the restaurant, Heather may have promised Kate to return the credit cards and the money that had been at Ethan's apartment. When the three arrived there, Heather and Ethan might have waited for the right moment to end with her life. The court questioned Heather's version of events and eventually sentenced her to 39 years in prison. As for Ethan, he was slightly luckier. He was sentenced to 25 years, this difference being that Heather was also charged with fraud. On August 9, 1980, Tim Hack and Kelly Drew, both 19, vanished after attending a wedding reception at Concord House in Concord, Wisconsin. In the days that followed, searches discovered various clues scattered throughout the town, including Tim's car with his wallet, a pair of pants, ropes, and a pair of women's underwear. These clues eventually led to a horrifying discovery. 2 months later, the bodies of Tim and Kelly were found brutally violated and abandoned in a field. It took nearly 3 decades, but advancements in DNA technology, along with an unexpected witness and a determined investigator, finally revealed the identity of the perpetrator. A seemingly unassuming man whose dark secrets were unknown even to his neighbors. But who was this man? And why did it take so long to uncover the truth? Today's narrative takes us back to Concord, Wisconsin, a small town in Jefferson County with a population of just over 2,000. Known for its tranquil parks and natural beauty, Concord is a haven for outdoor enthusiasts who enjoy activities like hiking, biking, fishing, and camping. With a violent crime rate of only 7%, significantly lower than the national average of 22.7%, Concord was a place where people felt safe, rarely locking their doors and looking out for one another. It was precisely the kind of community where Tim Hack and Kelly Drew, young high school sweethearts, envisioned a future together, getting married, settling on a farm, raising their children and growing old side by side. In 1980, Tim and Kelly, both 19, were deeply in love and engaged to be married. Despite living in different towns within Jefferson County, Tim in Hebron and Kelly in Fort Atkinson, their paths crossed while attending Fort Atkinson High School. Kelly, a young woman known for her beauty and kindness, had a deep passion for cosmetology. On the other hand, Tim, a hardworking farm boy, possessed strength and determination. Both individuals were adored by their loved ones for their compassionate nature. As a couple, Tim and Kelly served as role models for other young people. After graduating from high school, Tim pursued a career in farming with his loyal companion, being a tractor affectionately named the Lonesome Loser. Meanwhile, Kelly attended beauty school and recently completed her studies in 1980, aspiring to become a skilled hairstylist and beautician. On August 9, 1980, Tim and Kelly attended a wedding reception at Concord House, Wisconsin. Following the celebration, They had plans to meet friends and enjoy a carnival. However, they failed to appear. The last sighting of them alive was around 11:00 p.m. on August 9, 1980, when they departed from the reception. Concerned by their absence and lack of communication, by the morning of August 10, 1980, Tim's father, David Hack, reported them as missing. On the same day, David discovered Tim's brown Oldsmobile parked at Concord House, containing Tim's wallet with $67, his jacket, and his checkbook, all locked inside. The case took a significant turn on August 15th, when searchers discovered Kelly's pants and underwear by the roadside, approximately 3 miles away from Concord House. These garments were found to have male bodily fluids on them. Additionally, ropes with military-style knots were found nearby, suggesting the involvement of an individual with military experience. This discovery drastically altered the nature of the investigation. It was no longer a matter of locating a couple who may have chosen to embark on a romantic escapade. Instead, the focus shifted to finding them alive, as they were believed to be in imminent danger. Approximately 2 months later, squirrel hunters from Milwaukee stumbled upon the badly decomposed remains of Kelly Drew in a wood area, approximately 7 miles from Concord House. Around 100 yards away, a fully clothed male body was discovered and later identified as Tim Hack. This marked the official declaration of the case as a homicide, earning it the name Sweatheart Murders. The exact cause of death was not immediately evident as no murder weapon was found at the scene. However, upon further examination, the medical examiner discovered stab wounds on Tim's body and ligature marks on Kelly, indicating that they were both victims of stabbing and strangulation. Kelly had ligature marks on her ankles and wrists, suggesting she had been bound. The presence of ligature marks and insect activity around her throat area indicated that she was most likely strangled. Additionally, bodily fluids found on Kelly's clothes pointed towards a sexual assault. The sweep-up murders captivated the nation due to its sensational nature. 2 young lovers brutally murdered, with the killer or killers still unidentified. The investigation began by interviewing acquaintances of the couple, searching for anyone who may have harbored enough hatred to commit such a heinous act. The police also questioned individuals present at the wedding reception, including the staff at the Concord House where the event took place. Among those interviewed was Edward Wayne Edwards, a handyman employed at the Concord House. Edward, who resided in a nearby campground close to Interstate 94, claimed to have had no contact with the couple and insisted he was not present at the Concord House when they went missing. He stated that he was deer hunting in the nearby woods during that time. However, the police became suspicious when they noticed that Edward had a broken nose. When questioned about it, he attributed the injury to his deer hunting trip. This raised concerns among investigators as deer hunting season in Wisconsin typically occurs in November, not August. Following the police interrogation, Edward relocated his wife and 5 children away from Wisconsin in September 1980. In the midst of the investigation, the investigators relied heavily on eyewitness accounts of a van with a grimy appearance that had been parked alongside Tim's car at the Concord House parking lot. Witnesses reported that the van abruptly departed under suspicious circumstances around the time Tim and Kelly were last seen. Edward happened to own a van that matched the description and was known to possess a .357 revolver. However, lacking a license plate number or substantial evidence linking him to the crime scene, the police were severely limited in their ability to pursue this lead. Consequently, all other leads in the case dried up, resulting in the shelving of the case and its subsequent stagnation. 2 decades after the murders of Tim Hack and Kelly Drew, Richard Lewell, an investigator from the Wisconsin Department of Justice who had been involved in the original investigation, requested the reopening of the case. Lewell had been unable to let go of the case for nearly 30 years, and as retirement loomed, he was determined to exhaust all efforts in solving it. In an interview, he expressed his confidence in pursuing the case due to the significant advancements in DNA technology and scientific methods over the past couple of decades. This newfound confidence propelled him to approach the case with renewed vigor. Lowell had a strong intuition that the police had already interviewed the killer during the initial stages of the investigation and that the person's name would be documented in the files. He simply needed to uncover it. After meticulously sifting through files, witness statements, and interview recordings for 2 months, one name caught Lowell's attention: Edward Wayne Edwards. Not only did Edward possess the means and opportunity to commit the crimes, but the fact that he relocated his entire family out of Wisconsin shortly after being interviewed by the police raised significant suspicions. Encouraged by this discovery, Lowell, along with a team of cold case investigators, resolved to pursue their hunch that Edward was the potential killer. When Edward's neighbors in Concord, Wisconsin were interviewed, it was revealed that he was a challenging person to live with. Described as short-tempered and volatile, he often resorted to violence towards his wife and children. One neighbor even went as far as to call him a monster. Edward's son, John Edwards, characterized him as troubled, mentioning his inability to control his emotions and the presence of underlying rage. In 2009, April Bellagio, Edward's daughter, reached out to authorities with crucial information regarding the cold case murder of Tim Hack and Kelly Drew. She believed that her father, Edward Wayne Edwards, was involved in the crime due to his extensive criminal background. April, who had always been intrigued by her father's mysterious life, felt compelled to share what she knew. Edward Wayne Edwards, born in Akron, Ohio in 1933, faced a tumultuous childhood after losing his parents and being placed in an orphanage. His experiences there, marked by abuse, contributed to his rebellious nature as a teenager. With a history of minor offenses, Edwards' criminal record began at a young age, leading to his enlistment in the U.S. Marines at 18. However, his time in the military was short-lived, resulting in a dishonorable discharge after disappearing shortly after enlistment. Was unwilling to abandon his life of crime, which ultimately led to his recurring imprisonment. By the age of 22 in 1955, he managed to escape from jail in Akron and embarked on a spree of robbing gas stations across various states. Throughout his 20s and 30s, Edward lived as a fugitive, drifting from place to place, and taking up art jobs such as working as a ship docker, vacuum cleaner retailer, and handyman. His autobiography clearly reflects his enjoyment of the notoriety he gained during this period. Edward proudly admitted to never using an alias or disguising his identity while committing crimes as he craved fame. However, his criminal activities caught up with him once again in 1960, resulting in imprisonment for attempting to impersonate a federal officer. Despite being held in the Portland, Oregon jail, Edward managed to escape, prompting the FBI to include him on their 10 most wanted list in 1961. Authorities eventually apprehended him in 1962 and incarcerated him at the United States Penitentiary Leavenworth. However, due to his good behavior, Edward was granted parole in 1967. He credited a compassionate guard at Leavenworth for his personal growth in his memoir. Following his release, Edward married and pursued a career as a motivational speaker. In 1972, at the age of 39, he made appearances on television shows such as To Tell the Truth and What's My Line. That same year, he published his autobiography, The Metamorphosis of a Criminal, the true life story of Ed Edwards. It seemed as though Edwards' fortunes were finally turning in his favor. He had outsmarted the system and was on the path to success. Unfortunately, his streak of good luck was short-lived. In 1977, Edward committed his first murder, targeting 21-year-old Billy Lavaco and his girlfriend, 18-year-old Judith Straub, both residents of Sterling, Ohio. The couple went on a date on August 7, 1977, but never returned. Later that day, Judith's car was discovered in the parking lot of Silver Creek Metro Park, with her shoes and purse left behind. On August 8th, the day following the incident, Norton Police, along with the assistance of family members and a National Guard helicopter, initiated a search for Billy and Judith. The search party eventually discovered their lifeless bodies concealed within the dense vegetation near the Metro Park. It was evident that they had been ruthlessly shot at close range with a 20-gauge shotgun. At that time, investigators were unable to establish a connection between Billy and Judith's case and Edward, allowing him to evade justice for the murders. These killings established a pattern that would persist with the subsequent murders of Tim and Kelly. Meanwhile, by 1982, at the age of 49, Edward found himself incarcerated once again in Pennsylvania, this time for arson. Nevertheless, he took pride in his criminal achievements. In 1993, Edward penned a letter to the FBI requesting his criminal and historical records from various cities across 19 states. Supposedly, these records were intended for a new book he was writing delving into the lives of criminals he had encountered during his time in prison, including individuals like Tony Provenzano, Charles Manson, and Jimmy Hoffa. In 1996, at the age of 63, Edward committed his third murder. This time, his victim was his foster son, 25-year-old Danny Boy Edwards, who had resided with him in Burton, Ohio, for a span of 7 years. Prior to his tragic demise, Danny Boy had served as a soldier in the U.S. Edward somehow managed to persuade him to desert the army and return home. Once Danny Boy arrived, Edward deceitfully lured him into the nearby woods, where he callously ended his life with 2 gunshots to the face. Edward then callously left Danny Boy's body in a shallow grave, which was eventually discovered by a hunter who promptly alerted the authorities. Similar to his initial set of murders, Edward managed to evade justice for the killing of Danny Boy for a couple of years. Individuals close to Edward, such as his son John and daughter April, described him as a deeply troubled individual. His abusive behavior towards his wife and children was extreme, leading his children to flee from home as soon as they could to escape his torment. Investigators strongly believed that Edward perfectly fit the profile of stereotypical serial killer. His extensive criminal history, coupled with his physical violence towards family members and the fact that he wrote a book detailing his crimes, all pointed towards his narcissistic nature. Edward's military background provided him with the knowledge to tie the knots on the ropes that were believed to have been used to strangle Kelly. His history of arson further reinforced the perception of him being extremely controlling. Despite his elderly appearance and reliance on an oxygen tank and wheelchair due to his weight, his neighbors in Louisville, Kentucky, were unaware of the evil mind that lurked within him. However, with new evidence and April's statements, investigators have a stronger basis to suspect Edward's involvement in the murders. Upon visiting his home in Louisville, Edward initially denied any knowledge of Tim Hack and Kelly Drew's murders. But under further questioning, he admitted to being at the Concord house on the night of the murders and seeing the couple. He also confessed that he had not been deer hunting that night, contrary to his earlier claims. Edward agreed to a saliva swab for DNA testing, confident that it would not reveal anything incriminating. However, the DNA test results matched the DNA found on Kelly's pants. In 2009, Edward was living in a trailer park in Louisville, where he was well liked by his neighbors who were unaware of his dark past. It wasn't until he was brought to Wisconsin and charged with the murders of Tim Hack and Kelly Drew that his true nature was revealed. During the interview, Edward was presented with the DNA test results, further implicating him in the crimes. Investigators requested an explanation from him regarding the presence of his bodily fluids on Kelly's clothes. Edward began to stutter, fabricating a tale about an intimate encounter with Kelly on the evening of August 9, 1980, claiming it was consensual. He fidgeted in his seat, gesturing wildly, sensing the investigator's skepticism. He let out a sigh and muttered something quietly. Upon reviewing the interview recording numerous times, investigators recalled the moment when Edward muttered, "Danette, I killed her." This admission sealed his fate. Edward opted to plead guilty to the murders of Tim Hack and Kelly Drew. In April 2010, Edward Wayne Edwards was found guilty of the 1980 Sweetheart murders and received 2 concurrent life sentences. Despite his request for execution, Wisconsin did not have the death penalty. Retired homicide detective Phil Waters noted that Edward had a history of incarceration and understood the harsh reality of prison life. Unwilling to spend his days behind bars, Edward penned a letter to the Ohio prosecutor's office hoping to persuade them to seek the death penalty by stating, "You're going to want to put a needle in my arm." In 2010, Edward confessed to the killings of Billy Lavaco and Judith Straub in 1977. But due to the absence of the death penalty at the time, he received life sentences for each. However, he still had one final revelation. During a jailhouse interview in 2011, Edward admitted to murdering his foster son, Danny Boy Edwards, for the life insurance money. This time, his scheme succeeded, and he was sentenced to death on March 8, 2011, for Danny Boy Edwards' murder. Despite being convicted of 5 homicides, investigators suspected that Edward may have had between 9 to 15 additional unidentified victims. In the book, The Peyton Allen Files, Phil Stanford suggested that Edward might have been responsible for the murders of Beverly Allen and Larry Peyton in Portman, Oregon in 1960. Detective Chad Garcia from the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, one of the investigators in the Svivart murders, also suggested that Edward might have been responsible for 15 other murders, including the Zodiac killings. Retired homicide detective John Cameron shared the belief that Edward was behind the Zodiac killings and other high-profile unsolved cases, although these claims remain unproven. Edward Edwards passed away on April 7, 2011, at the Corrections Medical Center in Columbus, Ohio, at the age of 77 due to natural causes. His death marked the end of a vicious crime spree that left 5 dead and many grieving. Edward avoided execution by lethal injection, which had been scheduled for August 31, 2011. Despite Edward's arrest for the murders of Tim and Kelly, their family members did not find closure. Norma Walker, Kelly's mother, expressed how Edward's arrest brought back painful memories instead of providing closure. Pim's father, David, felt relief that it was finally over and was grateful for the DNA technology that confirmed Edward as the killer. Edward's daughter, April Bellaccio, who helped solve the cold case, now dedicates her time to assisting other families of victims with unsolved cases through her podcast, The Clearing. Tim Hack and Kelly Drew had promising futures ahead of them, but their lives were tragically cut short by their killer, Edward Wayne Edwards. Edward, the serial killer, had no personal vendetta against the couple. They were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, adding to the tragedy of their story. Following Edward Wayne Edwards' arrest and the conclusion of the cases, the loved ones of Tim Hack and Kelly Drew, along with the other victims, still struggled to come to terms with the aftermath of the tragedies. Even though Edward's conviction provided some closure, the wounds inflicted by his deeds remained profound. Joan D'Alessandro was born on September 7, 1965 in the quiet town of Hillsdale, New Jersey. She had loving parents and 2 older brothers. Their family lived in a peaceful suburban neighborhood and was deeply religious. From an early age, Joan regularly attended her local church and later she enrolled in a Baptist elementary school. Joan quickly made a lot of friends and did great in her classes. She also developed a love for ballet and really started to get into the arts. At about the same time, Joan joined the Girl Scouts, spending a lot of time outdoors with other girls, picking up some valuable life skills, socializing, and just having fun. One of their main activities was selling cookies. The girls would go door to door in their neighborhoods, asking people to buy them. April 19th, 1973 was Clean Thursday, and Joan's school had the day off. The 7-year-old spent it at home with her mom, mostly playing in the yard. Around 3 p.m., she saw one of her neighbors pull into the driveway. Some of the neighbors had pre-ordered cookies, and Joan would deliver the boxes once they were ready. By that afternoon, she only had a few deliveries left. So, without wasting any time, Joan ran inside, grabbed a few boxes, and headed out. She told her mom she'd be back in a few minutes. But as time passed and Joan didn't return, her mom started to worry. At first, she assumed Joan might have bumped into some neighborhood kids and lost track of time playing with them. Their neighborhood was quiet and considered very safe, and back then, kids often played outside unsupervised. But when an hour passed and Joan still hadn't returned, her mom started to think something might be wrong. By then, it had started raining, and she thought Joan might have taken shelter at a friend's house to wait out the bad weather. The rain stopped pretty quickly, but Joan was still nowhere to be found. Soon after, her dad came home from work and his wife told him she couldn't find Joan. He immediately got in his car and started driving around the neighborhood looking for her. But there was no sign of Joan anywhere. Meanwhile, Joan's mom tried to find the list of addresses where her daughter was supposed to deliver cookies, but realized Joan had probably taken it with her. However, she remembered something Joan had said just before leaving. She hadn't mentioned which neighbor she was going to, but she had said that the person had just pulled into their driveway in a new car. Her mom immediately thought of a family who lived just a few houses down, as they were the only ones in the neighborhood with a new vehicle. While her husband continued searching the streets, she decided to check with those neighbors and visit some other houses where Joan might have dropped off cookies. Joan's mother visited several neighbors, but all of them said they hadn't seen the girl that day. Frustrated and increasingly alarmed, she returned home, and when her husband told her he hadn't found any sign of her daughter either, they decided it was time to call the police. After hearing Joan's mother's story, officers jumped right into action and launched a large-scale search operation. The local fire department joined in, sending out crews to help, while the police went door to door in a several-mile radius, hoping someone might have seen Joan or could point them in the right direction. But no one had spotted the girl. This was quite odd, especially since the street leading away from Joan's house was a main road that led to a busy shopping center. Cars were constantly coming and going, yet no one had noticed a young girl walking in the area. As word of Joan's disappearance spread through the neighborhood, dozens of local residents began joining the search. Many of them knew Joan's family well and were eager to help in any way they could. The number of people involved in the search grew by the hour. By midnight, local officers requested assistance from the FBI and state police. Search dogs were brought in to track Joan's scent using her belongings, but the efforts led nowhere. Volunteers combed through abandoned lots, empty houses, nearby forests, parks, and even the shores of a local lake. But despite their dedication, there was no trace of Joan. At first, police considered the possibility that Joan might have wandered too far from home and gotten lost. But by the middle of the night, it became clear that the situation was far more serious. If she had simply lost her way, she likely would have been found by then. This led investigators to suspect foul play. Joan's mother dismissed any chance that her daughter had left somewhere voluntarily. Joan never wandered far from home without permission and always returned when she was supposed to. That day, she promised to be back in just a few minutes. So her mom was convinced something terrible had happened. Around 3 a.m., the police decided to take a break from the search and resume at sunrise. By morning, even more volunteers had joined in. It felt like the whole town had come together to look for Joan. Women who were home with their own children also found ways to help, preparing over 2,000 meals for the search teams throughout the day. Along with the local community, nearly every officer from the police department was involved, as well as about 250 firefighters from nearby towns and a few FBI teams. That day, searchers combed through every inch of the area. They entered every home, checked every yard, garage, shed, basically anywhere Joan could possibly be. But despite their exhaustive efforts, they found no trace of her. The search went on until one of the teams spotted a child's shoe less than a mile from Joan's home. It looked very much like the ones Joan had been wearing when she left the house. But that wasn't all. Near the shoe were several empty boxes of the same cookies Joan had been selling. Police immediately showed the shoes to Joan's mother, but the moment she saw it, she said it didn't belong to her daughter. On top of that, investigators examined the cookie boxes and concluded they had likely been there for several weeks. Eventually, some local residents came forward and identified the shoe. It belonged to their child. So this lead was ruled out, and investigators were back to square one. Despite their determination and the support of hundreds of volunteers, the day's search once again ended without answers. Meanwhile, the FBI began focusing heavily on the possibility of foul play. After speaking with Joan's mother, they learned that she had already visited all the neighbors where Joan might have delivered cookies. Each of them said that Joan had not come to their house, and there was no trace of the girl or the cookies anywhere. However, Joan's mother shared something else with the detectives, a gut feeling she had about one particular neighbor. As we know, before leaving the house, Joan mentioned she was going to deliver cookies to a neighbor who had just pulled into their driveway in a brand new car. The only neighbors who had recently purchased a vehicle were the McGowans. So Joan's mother went straight to their house. She was met by 26-year-old Joseph McGowan, who lived there with his mother and grandmother. He claimed he hadn't seen Joan, but something about him felt off. Joan's mom couldn't put her finger on it. She just had a bad feeling about him. The detectives had already spoke with Joseph, but he denied having anything to do with Joan's disappearance. Still, they couldn't ignore some red flags. He seemed to struggle with his own story, constantly tripping over details about his alibi for the time Joan went missing. But despite their suspicions, there wasn't any physical evidence in his home linking him to the case. Joseph also had no criminal record. It was actually quite the opposite. He worked as a school chemistry teacher and had a great reputation in the community. Still, as the hours turned into days, the detective's gut feeling about him only grew stronger. Eventually, they brought him into the station for a polygraph test, and Joseph agreed to answer their questions. The results weren't what he was hoping for. The operator flagged multiple signs of deception on nearly every key question. However, the police couldn't use the polygraph results as solid evidence of his guilt. Instead, they informed Joseph about his failure and kept pressing him to tell the truth. Eventually, to the surprise of the detectives, their persistence paid off. And in a quite unexpected way, Joseph broke down and asked them to bring a priest to the station. After speaking with the priest in private, Joseph finally confessed to what happened that day. According to his story, he had been mowing the lawn outside his house when Joan approached him with a few boxes of cookies. He said he had ordered them a couple weeks earlier, so he invited Joan inside to pay for them. From this point, Joseph's account took a strange turn. According to his words, he suddenly realized he didn't have the exact amount of cash to pay her, which, for some unknown reason, deeply upset him. Feeling ashamed, he grabbed Joan and dragged her to his bedroom, where he struck her multiple times and subjected her to other horrifying acts. The detectives, of course, didn't buy this part of his story for even a second, but they let him continue his confession. After committing these horrific acts, Joseph suddenly realized the gravity of what he'd done and started panicking about what to do next. He knew that if he let Joan go, it would destroy his life, so he decided to get rid of her. After several failed attempts, Joseph killed Joan, wrapped her body in an old sofa cover and placed it in the trunk of his car. Then he cleaned up the blood in his bedroom, stuffed the cleaning rags into a bag, and drove to a national park in neighboring New York State about 20 miles from his home. At the park, He carried Joan's body into a wooded area and hid it behind a large rock. On his way back, he also disposed of the evidence in random trash bins along the road. Shortly after he returned home, Joan's mother came by looking for her daughter. Later, Joseph even joined the search efforts for the missing girl along hundreds of locals. After finishing his confession, Joseph says something quite unsettling. He told the police that despite everything he'd done, he was completely calm that night and had no trouble falling asleep at all. While parts of Joseph's story immediately raised questions, investigators prioritized finding Joan's body. They contacted New York's Park Services and Joseph gave them detailed directions to the location. Thanks to this, the search took less than an hour. Joan's body was discovered behind a large rock in a remote wooded area. Once medical examiners began their work, more inconsistencies in Joseph's story came to light. During his interrogation, Joseph insisted he didn't assay Jones. But forensic experts found undeniable evidence to the contrary. As for the rest, they did find numerous injuries and bruises, and his description of the cause of death aligned with reality. Another glaring contradiction in Joseph's account was the fact that Joan's body was completely unclothed. Yet even when detectives confronted him with this detail, Joseph continued to deny anything related to SA. For Joseph's family and friends, the entire situation was a complete shock. They had always seen him as a decent, kind person and couldn't believe he was capable of something so horrific. His colleagues at the elementary school where he worked as a chemistry teacher were equally stunned. To them, Joseph was a talented and well-educated teacher who had never caused any trouble. As for the residents of their town, dozens of them began gathering outside Joseph's house in the days following his arrest. While most didn't act aggressively, police decided to block off the entire street as a precaution, fearing someone might try to harm his mother or grandmother. Some residents were so outraged by what had happened that they even started flipping through phone books looking for people with the last name McGowan and calling them to unleash their anger. None of these individuals had any connection to Joseph, yet incidents like this became common. Several families even filed complaints saying these calls were making their lives unbearable. Soon, the community was enraged even more because the judge decided to set Joseph's bail at $50,000 after his arrest. While that was a huge amount of money for the time, people were furious. Hundreds of them flooded the court with angry letters demanding the bail be revoked, insisting that Joseph should remain behind bars. The thought of him potentially walking free and living just a few houses away from his victim's family was unthinkable. But not everyone opposed the idea of Joseph being released on bail. Some residents were actually eager for him to get out so they could take justice into their own hands. Under immense pressure, the court eventually changed its decision and revoked Joseph's bail, even though his family had already managed to gather the necessary amount. In the end, he was kept in jail to await trial and placed in solitary confinement for his own safety, as other inmates were eager to harm him. The trial began several months after Joseph's arrest, and he pleaded guilty to the murder. However, he continued to deny the fact of SA and insisted that the crime was a spontaneous act. According to him, he didn't understand what had come over him, but the prosecution wasn't buying it. Before the trial, several psychiatrists evaluated Joseph, and they all concluded that he had harbored dark, monstrous desires for many years. He had managed to hide these urges, presenting himself as a normal and well-adjusted person. But the moment he had the chance to act on his fantasies, he didn't hesitate a second. There was also speculation suggesting that Joseph had planned something like this in advance. The fact that Joan's body was hidden deep in the woods behind a large rock raised serious doubts that he had chosen the spot on a whim. Investigators strongly believed he had known about the location long before the crime and kept it in his mind as a convenient place to dispose of a body. At the end of the trial, Joseph was sentenced to life in prison. But there was a catch. The laws at the time allowed for parole even for someone like him, which meant the case was far from over. Nearly 20 years later, Joseph became eligible to apply for parole, causing outrage among Joan's family. Her parents said they hadn't even known this was an option. To make matters worse, their attorney warned them that if they didn't take action to oppose his release, there was a strong chance Joseph would walk free. The problem was that over the years, Joseph had undergone multiple evaluations with psychiatrists, all of whom concluded that he was no longer a threat to society and could be released. Adding to his case was his spotless behavior throughout his time in prison. As a result, Joan's mother was forced to do everything in her power to convince the judge and others in the parole system that Joseph did not deserve to be released. At the same time, she decided to push for changes in the law to ensure that parole would never be an option for criminals like Joseph. And after many years of relentless effort, She succeeded. A new law was passed in New Jersey that made anyone convicted of murdering a person under 14 for the purposes of SA ineligible for parole under any circumstances. Just a year later, a federal version of this law passed, mostly thanks to Joan's mother's tireless advocacy. As for Joseph, he didn't fall under the jurisdiction of the new laws. However, Joan's mother still managed to convince the court to deny his parole. But in 1999, another chance for his release came up, and this time unexpected happened. Before the decision was made, Joseph underwent another evaluation with a psychiatrist, whose job was to assess his mental state. During these conversations, Joseph suddenly changed the story he had been sticking to for over 20 years. Initially, he had claimed that he attacked Joan out of frustration when he couldn't find the right amount of change. That story had never been particularly convincing, but now Joseph admitted that wasn't how it happened at all. According to Joseph, he had been going through personal struggles during that period of time. He was unsatisfied with his life, unhappy with his job, and generally miserable, which left his mind in a pretty dark state. When Joan came to his door with cookies, he claimed he just decided to take out his anger on her, leading him to commit the crime. Despite this new explanation, the court once again denied his parole. Over the following years, Joseph continued to petition for early release, but each time the outcome was the same. His requests were rejected. During one of his attempts to secure parole, Joseph gave an interview to John Douglas, a former FBI agent and author whose work inspired characters in The Silence of the Lambs and the series like Hannibal and Mindhunter. Douglas, known for interviewing infamous serial killers like Charles Manson, agreed to assess whether Joseph was fit to re-enter society. After their conversation, Douglas concluded that Joseph posed a significant danger to anyone around him, describing his uncontrollable urge to kill as deeply concerning. Using his unique approach, Douglas managed to earn Joseph's trust, uncovering something quite troubling in the process. At some point, Joseph boasted about having over $600,000. He explained that after his mother and grandmother passed away, he received sizable payouts and sold their house. But here's the kicker. Joseph revealed he had moved all the money to a bank in neighboring New York State to ensure that Joan's mother couldn't touch a single penny through civil lawsuits, leaving him with plenty of money to pay for legal representation. Douglas was so struck by this interview, he later wrote an entire book about it. Joseph's last attempt to secure parole was in 2008, with his next hearing scheduled for 2025. Joan's mother was preparing to oppose his release once again, but she didn't have to. Joseph passed away in 2021 at the age of 74. In the end, he spent most of his life behind bars and remained there until his death. As for Joan's mother, she continues her fight against criminals like the one that took her daughter. A few years ago, she successfully pushed to raise the age limit in her original law from 14 to 18 in New Jersey. She also helped pass another law in the state that completely removed the statute of limitations for murder cases. In addition to that, she founded a non-profit organization dedicated to helping children, which has achieved remarkable results over the years. Joan's mother plans to keep building on this work, both to honor her daughter's memory and to protect thousands of other children. The case of Wendy Trapaga Yolanda Cirillo was born in Miami, Florida. She was a 28-year-old single mother who lived a quiet life away from the hustle and bustle of the city. Yolanda had devoted herself to raising her daughter and being a model mother, giving up the party life. After a while, Yolanda was ready to find stability and a new partner. She began a relationship with Michel Escoto, a man known for his good looks and impeccable grooming. Their relationship, which started out innocent and harmonious, gradually developed into love. Yolanda and Michel met at a computer engineering school. Although they had opposite personalities, she was calm and practical, while he was a romantic, adventurous, and gregarious person. Despite their differences, they found each other and began a promising relationship. Michel and Yolanda Cirillo seemed like an unlikely couple. However, after a year of living together, they started building a family. Yolanda, who already had a child from a previous relationship, was very happy to see her boyfriend Escoto loving her daughter. Everything seemed fine, but Michel still had one unfulfilled dream. He wanted to build a successful career and start his own business. Yolanda fully supported Michel's dream because she knew that his success would ensure a stable future for her and her daughter. She also hoped that they would get married and start a family. Michel promised Yolanda that he would give them the dream life they both craved when he achieved financial success. When looking at the most lucrative industries in Miami, Michel realized that there was a great demand for cosmetic services. so he decided to delve into this field. With a basic knowledge of hairdressing, he wanted to learn more about business to open his own salon. His goal was to create a space that was welcoming to everyone. Michel found a beauty school near where he lived and enrolled in February 2002. While studying at this school, Michel found himself different because he was one of the few men in the beauty industry while he was surrounded by young, dynamic women. These women were very interested in Michel because he was charming, easily won their hearts. This made him popular among the female students. However, despite his relationship with Yolanda, Michel could not resist the charms of Wendy Trapaga, a beautiful 21-year-old girl. He began to flirt with her and often behaved inappropriately around her, but he still did not tell Yolanda about these things. Every night, Michel still returned to Yolanda, maintaining the appearance of a normal family life, but the more time he spent with Wendy, the more he felt guilty towards Yolanda. Wendy Trapaga was different from the women Michel had met before. Wendy was sweet, charming, and had the figure of a model. Wendy was born on April 29, 1981, the daughter of Miriam and Ernest. She grew up in a normal and loving family. Wendy had always been loved by her father, Ernest, who had always made sure that Wendy had grown up in an environment filled with love and respect. Ernest had been a cargo pilot, and his job had required him to travel frequently, which had made Wendy always look forward to his return from each trip. Every time he had returned home, Wendy had been extremely happy and had received a gift from him. March 31, 1988, had been an unforgettable day in Wendy's life when she had been 16 years old. Wendy's father's plane had exploded at an altitude of 150 feet above the ground and had crashed into a barren land near the runway. This tragedy had taken the lives of all passengers on board. The deep sadness that Wendy had experienced that day had followed her throughout her life. Ernest had been 61 years old when he had passed away, leaving Wendy's mother, Miriam, deeply saddened. After becoming a widow, Miriam had devoted herself to supporting her family and had secured a position as a school administrative assistant. She had worked hard to be able to supervise extracurricular programs at an elementary school in Miami-Dade County. Eventually, Miriam had found love again and had married Juan Benes. Wendy had had half-siblings who had warmly accepted her, providing her with the much-needed affection she had been missing since her father's death. During her teenage years, Wendy had developed a strong passion for aesthetics and high fashion. She had possessed a captivating beauty with deep brown eyes, long hair, and a radiant smile, attracting everyone's attention. Despite this, Wendy had remained humble and kind, making those around her admire her even more. After completing her studies, Wendy had gotten married, but unfortunately, this marriage had soon fallen apart. This had motivated her to pursue her passion and learn from her relatives who had run beauty salons. So she had enrolled in Label Beauty Academy in Miami. There, Wendy had met Michel Escato, a man who could make her smile. Michel's charm and compliments had captivated her. Michel had introduced himself as an executive in the web design industry, with a degree in technology. Perhaps the loss of her father at an early age had made Wendy more sympathetic to older men, considering them safe. However, Michel had not revealed to Wendy that he had a girlfriend, Yolanda. Instead, he had spent more time with Wendy. The feelings between Wendy and Michel had grown deeper and deeper, and they had spent more time together. While Yolanda had thought that Michel was focused on his career, the relationship between Wendy and Michel had naturally turned from emotional to physical. Wendy and Michel had gradually become inseparable. However, Yolanda had felt confused by the changes in her relationship with Michel. Even though they had been together for more than 2 years, she had not known that Michel often met other women, one of whom had even sponsored his studies. Initially, Michel had only seen Wendy as a friend, but over time, he had begun to feel deeper feelings for her. He had appreciated the freedom and lack of pressure in his relationship with Wendy. However, Michel had always kept his relationship with Wendy a secret. Even though Michel and Wendy had been entering their second month of a romantic relationship, Michel had hidden it from everyone, which had made Wendy feel confused. Yolanda had also felt that Michel seemed to be growing more distant and their relationship had started to feel more like best friends than lovers. Yolanda had become suspicious of Michel's schedule, and the silence had made the two of them grow more distant. Michel had eventually decided to end his relationship with Yolanda because he had fallen in love with Wendy. In August 2002, Michel and Yolanda had had an argument, and to express his dissatisfaction, Michel had packed his things and left. Yolanda could not believe it. Yolanda had dreamed of a future with Michel, but he had left without giving any explanation. Yolanda had tried to understand her shortcomings and the reason behind his departure. Yolanda had kept calling Michelle, but he had not answered. Eventually, Yolanda had deciphered his voicemail password and had discovered messages revealing that he had moved in with another woman named Wendy. Yolanda was shocked to learn of Michelle and Wendy's relationship and was furious. Michelle and Wendy had moved into a modest apartment in Miami. Unexpectedly, in that small space, the two began a life filled with dreams and satisfaction. Although some of Wendy's family objected to her decision to live with Michelle, Wendy's mother, Miriam, was concerned that Michelle was almost a decade older than Wendy and, on top of that, he was still unemployed. She wondered if Wendy and Michelle had ever shared their jobs or incomes. She was also extremely surprised to find that their house was almost bare, to the point that Wendy and Michelle had to sleep on the floor. The most important thing to her was Wendy's happiness. While Wendy was always careful about her finances and kept a tight budget, Michelle, on the other hand, was wasteful and unclear about how he earned his money. Miriam simply thought that Michelle made money through IT to explain her doubts. Because there were so many questions about Michelle, Miriam, and her daughter, Wendy disagreed about Wendy's marriage. Miriam did not agree with Wendy's hasty decision to get married. Ignoring her mother's advice, Wendy and Michelle decided to go ahead with the wedding. They planned to hold a wedding ceremony at the City Hall in October 2002, with a simple legal procedure and a not-so-complicated wedding ceremony. When Miriam asked why they got married so quickly, Wendy revealed that she was pregnant. On October 10, 2002, Wendy and Michelle exchanged vows at the Miami Beach City Hall. They then planned a simple honeymoon in Key West, Florida. Michelle and Wendy left on Friday, October 11th, planning to return Sunday evening. Their two-day adventure in Key West was filled with fun times. However, on Sunday, Michelle and Wendy were reluctant to let their short vacation end. Michelle had booked a luxurious suite in a prestigious romantic hotel. Wendy was thrilled to have their honeymoon extended unexpectedly. Wendy informed her mother of the decision to extend their stay. Wendy's mother, Miriam, was also delighted to hear the news. Although she was concerned about Wendy's health due to her pregnancy, Miriam was happy for her daughter's happiness. Michelle and Wendy envisioned a romantic evening that included dining out, perhaps watching a movie, or dancing the night away at a nightclub. Michelle and Wendy arrived at the hotel close to midnight and spent some time alone together in their room. Little did they know that this would be Wendy's last night on Earth. At around 5:30 a.m. on Monday, Miriam was awakened by a surprise phone call. When she looked at the clock, she felt anxious about such an early call. Miriam picked up the phone feeling even more nervous. It was Michelle on the other end of the line, asking her if Wendy was with her and speaking in a cryptic tone. Michelle explained that they had gone out drinking the night before, and Wendy had wanted to stay even though he had been worried about their unborn child. This had led to their first argument in the car on the way home. He had gone back to the apartment alone while leaving her outside. When he had checked back after 5 to 10 minutes, she had disappeared. All attempts to contact her by phone had failed. After her conversation with Michelle, Miriam had agreed to give Wendy some space even though she was extremely worried about where Wendy might be at the moment. She had tried not to panic, but she had known that Wendy did not act that way. At 6 a.m., a sanitation worker walking his routine route through a commercial warehouse complex in the Northwest Dade area had contacted Miami police after noticing something unusual in the parking lot between two cars. As he had gotten closer, he had come across a woman wearing a blue evening gown lying face down in a pool of blood. The forensic experts had been stunned when they had arrived at the scene and had seen blood splattered on a nearby vehicle. An autopsy later revealed that the woman had been struck multiple times with a heavy object, leaving her body disfigured beyond recognition. Although no weapon had been found at the scene, the deceased had been quickly identified as Wendy Trapaga thanks to a driver's license and a wallet containing identifying items found next to her. When Miriam had received the devastating news of her daughter's death, she had been plunged into a deep depression. Tears streaming down her face, Miriam, who had lost her husband, now had to deal with the sudden loss of her daughter. As the detectives had worked to determine the cause of Wendy's death, Miriam had received a call from Wendy's husband, Michelle, asking for any updates on Wendy. Miriam had been speechless and had struggled to convey to Michelle that Wendy was no longer alive. A detective had intervened, taking over the call to inform Michelle that they would be visiting his home to discuss the matter in detail. Michelle had been completely stunned and unable to speak. The police had taken Michelle to the police station to gather more information. During a 14-hour interrogation, Michelle had recounted the events of the evening leading up to Wendy's tragic death. As they had left the hotel and driven home around 3 a.m., Michelle and Wendy had gotten into an argument over drinking. During the argument, Wendy had unexpectedly admitted to Michelle that she was not pregnant, which had added to the tension of the argument. As they had approached their apartment, Michelle had decided to go inside to give them both time to calm down, leaving Wendy in the car. That had been the last time he had seen Wendy. The autopsy report later revealed that Wendy had died from being repeatedly beaten with a blunt object, causing 15 to 20 severe injuries to her face and neck. Her face had been unrecognizable due to the injuries. There had also been signs of strangulation. Investigators had also found strange DNA on Wendy's dress. A physical examination had revealed that Wendy had had alcohol and sedatives in her system. Her estimated time of death had been between 3 and 5 a.m. on October 14th. Some strange points had also been discovered. Wendy had been found without shoes, but her feet had been clean. In addition, there had been no injuries to her hands and feet, suggesting that she might not have resisted during the attack, or that she might have been unconscious or restrained. The medical examiner had also confirmed that Wendy had not been pregnant at the time of her death, raising further questions about the reason behind her lie. Authorities had found a new lead. They had discovered that Michel had made a phone call at 3:15 a.m., the day his wife had died. Detectives followed up on a crucial lead and discovered that Michel's last call had been made to his ex-girlfriend, Yolanda. When informed of Wendy's death, Yolanda shared her love story with the police. She admitted to having had deep feelings for Michel and was heartbroken by his sudden passing. Despite attempts to contact him, he remained unresponsive until the fall of 2002 when he returned her call. When questioned, Michel admitted to having had an affair with another woman but maintained that he had no feelings for Wendy. He said that he still loved Yolanda and hoped to reunite with her. Yolanda, who still loved Michel, trusted him again and hoped that this would rekindle their romance. However, Michel continued to live a double life. The investigation was hampered by the lack of solid evidence, including DNA, fingerprints, surveillance camera footage, or even a murder weapon. All they had were unsubstantiated statements. About 2 months after Wendy's death, Michel reemerged as a prime suspect in the case. After being caught planning to cash in Wendy's life insurance policy, questions were raised about the true motives of Michel, who was the primary beneficiary of the policy. After this discovery, detectives suspected that Michel had a strong financial motive, seeing as the insurance policy was worth $1 million. The investigation team continued to pursue this theory. On the other hand, an unexpected aspect of Michel's personal history was revealed during the investigation. Michel had previously been arrested and charged with armed robbery. He was also charged with unlawful possession of a firearm and possession of drugs. 3 years after Wendy's death, detectives decided to interview Yolanda again, suspecting that she had more information than she had previously disclosed. After Wendy's death, Michel and Yolanda reunited and moved in together, but their life together was not a happy one. When Yolanda was brought in for questioning, law enforcement officers presented evidence that Yolanda had been the one who had funded Michel and Wendy's vacation after they had married. The police forced Yolanda to reveal the truth by warning her of the consequences of lying. Yolanda gradually opened up to the police. According to her testimony, when Yolanda and Michel resumed their relationship in the fall, Michel told her that he had to marry Wendy because Wendy was pregnant. However, in reality, Michel was indifferent to Wendy and planned to get rid of her to get the $1 million insurance money. Michel and Yolanda's ultimate plan was to kill Wendy and take her huge insurance money. Yolanda was blinded by her love for Michel and decided to go along with Michel's plan. The only thing she cared about was that Michel would reunite with her. According to the following testimony, after failing to get rid of Wendy during the holiday, Michel decided to take drastic action. Michel had laced Wendy's drink with a sedative in their hotel room. When Wendy began to fall asleep, Michel took her outside and put her in the car. In the middle of the night, Michel went to Yolanda's house and asked her to let him use her car. Michel then went to a parking lot far from the residential area in Northwest Dade and asked Yolanda to stay in the car for a while. Yolanda then witnessed Michel returning to her car with blood on his hands and a crowbar. They continued to Biscayne Bay, where Michel removed the murder weapon and washed away the evidence of the crime. Yolanda then drove Michel back to the residence she shared with Wendy, where Michel disposed of his bloody clothes. However, Yolanda's testimony may have been unreliable. Yolanda may have been more directly involved in the murder of Michel's wife. If Michel had not used the crowbar to kill his wife, it was possible that Yolanda herself was responsible for the brutality and disfigurement of Wendy's body. Unfortunately, the truth of this case may have remained unknown due due to Yolanda's immunity agreement that protected her from arrest or prosecution. This was used by Michel's attorney to place the blame entirely on Yolanda in order to protect his client. However, after deliberating for just 2.5 hours, the jury convicted Michel Escoto of first-degree murder and sentenced him to life in prison without parole. While Wendy's family finally felt that justice had been served after years of waiting, they were not entirely satisfied that Yolanda Cirillo would continue to walk free. The case of Jassy Correa. Jassy Correa was born in Praia, Cabo Verde, but her family moved to the United States when she was just 3 years old. She grew up in Dorchester, Massachusetts, and Boston became her hometown. As she grew older, Jassy became a loving mother to her daughter, Gabriella. However, Jassy's personal life was marred by difficulties. Jassy's husband, Miguel Castro, physically attacked her. Despite wanting to leave him, Miguel refused to let her go and severely beat her. Jassy eventually reported the incident to the police, and Miguel was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Jassy worked as a waitress at Del Frisco, a Boston restaurant. In her free time, she enjoyed dancing and photography. She cherished moments spent with her family, friends, and daughter, Gabriella. One of her favorite activities was taking her little daughter to the park. On the evening of February 23, 2019, Jassy celebrated her birthday with friends at Venue, a nightclub in Boston's Deter district. Before heading out, she left her 2-year-old daughter with her family and got ready for a night out wearing a new orange jumpsuit. They had spent the evening dancing and drinking champagne at a nightclub. When the club closed, Jassy and her 2 friends stepped outside, but they eventually went their separate ways, leaving Jassy alone. She never made it home that night, and her phone was turned off with all calls going straight to voicemail. For 2 days, Sunday and Monday, there was no news from Jassy. No one had seen her since she left the nightclub on Sunday morning. On Tuesday, February 26th, Jassy's father, when Correa and one of Jassy's friends went to the police station to report her disappearance. The police immediately launched an investigation. The detective's first priority was to determine where Jassy went after leaving the nightclub. Jassy's family and friends distributed flyers around the city, hoping someone might have information about her whereabouts. The detectives also interviewed Jassy's friends who were with her that night, but they didn't know where she had gone after leaving the club. According to her friends, Jassy had planned to head home after saying goodbye. To gather more information, the police interviewed witnesses and reviewed CCTV footage from cameras inside and outside the nightclub. One recording showed Jassy on the sidewalk on Tremont Street, near the nightclub, talking to several people at 2:14 a.m. This was after she had left the club. The footage revealed that Jassy, who appeared to be intoxicated, mistakenly got into an Uber she hadn't ordered. The driver, unhappy about the mix-up, argued with her and eventually pushed her out of the vehicle. After being forced out of the car, Jassy continued to argue with the driver. That's when an unknown man approached her and took her hand, pulling her aside to talk. Despite possibly wanting to leave, Jassy was unable to free herself from his grasp. The CCTV footage showed the man still holding Jassy's hands, pulling her closer. Eventually, Jassy left the area with him. In hindsight, it's clear that she had fallen prey to a predator who took advantage of her vulnerable state. The next camera footage showed Jassy jumping onto his back, and he carried her to his car. They drove away together. 14 minutes later, the police had many questions to answer. Who was this man and where had he taken Jassy? Fortunately, they quickly identified the man and located his address. Louis Coleman, a 32-year-old man from a good family background, was with Jassy at the time of the incident. He had earned a master's degree in physics and had no prior record with the law. Notably, there was no information in the police database about Louis owning a car. However, his mother, a resident of California, was the owner of a 2016 red Buick, which matched the type of vehicle involved in the incident with Jassy. Louis lived in Providence, Rhode Island, about 50 miles from the Venue nightclub where he was last seen with Jassy. When police arrived at his home, they found that Louis was no longer there. However, CCTV footage from inside and outside the building revealed disturbing evidence. It's worth noting that the drive from the Venue club to Louis's apartment typically takes about an hour. Since Louis returned to his apartment at 4:15 a.m. on Sunday, approximately 2 hours after he was seen leaving with Jassy, it's likely that he stopped somewhere along the way. The next day, Louis sent an email to his colleague stating that he would be taking a few more days off. Based on the content of the email, It appears that Lewis was trying to buy time to cover his tracks. Over the next 2 days, Lewis attempted to conceal evidence of the crime. Further CCTV footage analysis sheds light on what happened to Jassy after she left with Lewis. Although the police never released the initial footage due to ethical concerns, it showed Lewis entering his apartment building with Jassy. FBI Special Agent Thomas Zukas described the footage as follows. Lewis was seen walking from a red sedan towards the front of the building carrying a body with long hair and orange pants. Agent Zukas believes that this footage shows Lewis carrying Jassy's body into his apartment building. According to Zukas, security footage from the building's lobby reveals that at approximately 4:27 a.m., Lewis entered the building carrying an unconscious or already deceased Jassy in his arms. He proceeded to the elevator, took it to the 6th floor. Notably, on February 26th, the same day Jassy's father reported her disappearance to the police, Lewis made a suspicious purchase at Walmart. His receipt shows he bought multiple items that raise red flags, including protective suits, duct tape, electrical tape, candles, gloves, safety goggles, a mask, and Clorox bleach. The next day, while friends and family distributed flyers with Jassy's picture, Lewis made another concerning purchase at Walmart, caught on camera at 9:22 p.m. This time, he bought a large suitcase and a canister. On February 27, 2019, at around 9:58 p.m., Lewis returned to the apartment building, and video footage appears to show him carrying the newly purchased large suitcase. Further footage captures Lewis taking the suitcase from his apartment to his vehicle in the parking lot, as evidenced by a recording at 2:15 a.m. on February 28. A video shows a man, later identified as Lewis, struggling to lift a suitcase into the trunk of his car. This footage is part of a larger investigation into the disappearance of Jassy Correa, who was last seen on February 24th and was believed to be at Lewis' apartment. Between 2:44 a.m. and 4:02 a.m., Lewis was seen leaving the building multiple times carrying various items, including cardboard boxes, trash bags, a bottle of bleach, a computer tower, a laptop case, and a small duffel bag. On February 28, 2019, police obtained a search warrant for Lewis's apartment. During their search, they found several suspicious items, including 2 packages of hooded coveralls and 2 respirator masks. They also examined a sofa in the apartment, which was missing one of its 4 large cushions. Outside the apartment complex, in a dumpster, police found a collection of items that raised further suspicions. These included white trash bags, a bag containing plastic sheets, men's jeans with bleach stains, and the belt. Additional items found in the dumpster included a white nylon hooded coverall, an unfilled box of baking soda, clear safety goggles, duct tape packaging, rubbing alcohol, Walmart bags, used plastic gloves, an empty package from a car air freshener, 3 used packages of purifying charcoal, and a sponge. On the afternoon of February 28, 2019, police stopped a car driven by Lewis near Wilmington, Delaware. Officers ordered Lewis to exit the vehicle and asked if he was alone. Lewis reportedly responded by saying, "She's in the trunk." When police investigated, they found the body of Jassy wrapped in a sofa cushion cover inside a black trash bag, which was placed in a large suitcase that matched the one Lewis had taken into his apartment the previous day. Experts who inspected the car found 2 cracks on the passenger side windshield, leading police to suspect that the man had attacked Jassy inside the vehicle. As a result, Lewis was arrested and taken to a Delaware State Police barracks. During questioning, Lewis had a large bandage on the right side of his face, which he claimed was from sheep when asked about it. A forensic examination revealed that Jassy died from a combination of strangulation and blunt force trauma. Additionally, seminal fluid was found on her body, and DNA analysis matched Lewis's DNA. Prosecutors noted that Lewis's DNA was also found under Jassy's fingertips. Although the exact location of Jassy's death could not be determined, it is believed to have occurred either in the car or at Lewis's apartment. On Saturday, March 9, 2019, family and community members gathered at St. Peter's Parish in Dorchester to pay their respects to Jassy Correa. Many wore white or displayed buttons, shirts, and sweatshirts with Jassy's face and the phrase, "Justice for Jassy." Maka DeAndrade, Jassy's cousin and best friend, delivered the first eulogy, expressing the community's sadness and acceptance of Jassy's passing. DeAndrade said, "We may not understand why Jassy's life was cut short, but I have faith that her death was not in vain. I trust that God has a plan, and I have faith in that." Boston Mayor Marty Walsh addressed the crowd, vowing to work towards creating a safer world for women. He emphasized that young women should be able to go out and celebrate without fear and return home safely to their loved ones. He acknowledged the immense pain Jassy Korea's family has endured and expressed his condolences. When Korea expressed gratitude to the city and law enforcement agencies for their tireless efforts in investigating Jassy's disappearance and death, he also paid a heartfelt tribute to his daughter, saying, "Rest in paradise, my dear Jassy. Rest in peace, my dear child." Lewis Coleman, the suspect, has been charged with kidnapping resulting in death, a crime that could carry the death penalty or a life sentence. However, prosecutors have announced that they will not seek capital punishment. During the trial, prosecutors presented evidence, including a video of Coleman dragging Jassy's body into his apartment and his online search history following her disappearance. FBI agents reported on Lewis's online activity in the days following the alleged kidnapping. He searched for topics such as whether a person can fit inside a suitcase and how to remove a tooth that is not loose. However, Lewis's defense team has disputed the relevance of this evidence to the kidnapping charge. They argue that the prosecution's focus has been on Lewis's actions after the alleged victim's death, rather than on the kidnapping itself. Attorney David stated, "This case is not about how Lewis behaved after her death, or whether he did anything illegal or inappropriate. The government's evidence has mainly centered on these issues, but I believe they are not crucial to determining whether a kidnapping occurred." Court documents filed by the prosecution and defense provide a detailed account of the events surrounding Jassy Korea's disappearance and death. Although these sides present different versions of what happened, the documents reveal disturbing details about the circumstances leading up to Jassy's death. Prosecutors established that the defendant, Lewis, was at the same nightclub as Jassy and her friends on the night of her disappearance. However, Lewis was interacting with a different woman he had just met, not Jassy. They exchanged phone numbers and texted each other while at the club and after it closed. The prosecution and defense have presented conflicting narratives about the events that unfolded. Prosecutors argue that Jassy was not the aggressor and that Lewis deceived her into getting into his car by offering her a ride to her friend's apartment, ultimately taking her life. In contrast, the defense claims that Jassy became aggressive after being pushed out of an Uber by the driver and that she initiated a fight with Lewis. The defense argues that the crime was a spontaneous altercation rather than a premeditated act of stalking, kidnapping, and murder. Prosecutors pointed out that the defendant's main argument was that the victim, who weighed 119 pounds, had attacked the defendant, who weighed 200 pounds. However, this claim was not convincing, especially considering that the victim's autopsy revealed the presence of multiple prohibited substances in her body, in addition to alcohol. The defense team attempted to minimize their client's involvement in the crime. Despite this, in June 2022, was found guilty of one count of kidnapping resulting in death. The defense team then filed a motion arguing that the evidence was insufficient to support the conviction, but this motion did not change the outcome of the trial. In October 2022, Lewis Coleman, 36, was sentenced to life in prison without parole for kidnapping and killing Jassy Korea. The court also ordered him to pay $60,000 in compensation to the victim's family.